11.3 and then we'll go back to 11.2. So we're on to 11.4, local water done well, on page 45 of councillor agendas. Right, you mentally prepared for this? Yes. Great. So we've had quite a bit of discussion about this, and also we have a very well articulated and clear presentation in our council agendas, which I hope you've all read. This is one of this future of our water services delivery is potentially one of the most important decisions we'll make as a councillor and as a council in this term. So we look forward to the first stage in those decisions happening today. So, well, not the first stage. We've made a couple of decisions already, but in terms of a way forward, this is probably a key milestone.
Madam Mayor. So yeah, we're right in the middle now and getting closer to a very key decision point, which we'll be looking at next year. So, morena to everybody. Today's paper is really, as we've talked before, is primarily to make that decision as to whether we head south in terms of the Wellington Regional proposal, and there's some other recommendations in there. We thought it was opportunist to also have a look at some of the other options that were available, and we felt there was enough information to make some decisions today as to whether you might want to proceed with those alternatives as well. So Martin is here. We'll talk to the report. I don't know if there's anything further you want to add. Maybe the Horowhenua decision.
Yep. So just in terms of the kia ora, morning, Martin Cole. Just in terms of the paper, it's seeking a decision around whether to continue or exit from the Wellington Regional project, looking at a water services CCO. And secondly, considerations, as Sean said, about alternative models to potentially take through to consultation early next year. Just in a bit of an update from yesterday, Horowhenua Council chose to exit the Wellington Regional model and consider doing an internal business unit, Horowhenua Kapiti model, Horowhenua Kapiti, Palmerston North and Manawatu model, with a preference towards Horowhenua and Kapiti as their preferred model. Is what they decided yesterday.
Great. So that gives us, that leaves all the options that are recommended in the paper open to us.
Yes.
Which is good.
Okay, in terms of the papers taken as read.
Yeah. Does anybody have any questions regarding the paper? We've got Nigel, who's got his hand up.
Quick off the mark.
Yeah, I'm just ready to move it.
Okay. So, well, I'll just take another question and then we'll progress that, Nigel, if that's okay. Councillor Halliday.
Yeah, through you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to get a little bit of clarity. On the recommendations on page 46, the recommendation F talks to resolves to exclude. I just a little bit confusing with all the acronyms and all that sort of scenario. I just wanted to get clarity exactly what that means. Resolves to exclude the advice and service only WSCCOs, a single Kapiti district only water services as recommended as options C, D and E. Oh right, hang on, that's C, D and E are the ones previous, is it? Not the options. It's the options paper. Yeah, so I just, by resolving to exclude the advice and service only WSCCO, a single Kapiti district only WSCCO and consumer trust models from the future delivery model and considerations for Kapiti water services recommend. Yeah, what do you mean by exclude them? I thought that's what we were going to do. Well, that's does that.
So the primary decision today is around the Wellington region.
I'll get that.
The secondary one, as you pointed out, is we've looked at all the options in the last briefing, and remove those from further consideration for consultation.
Yep. So is that removing, that to me seems,
It's the words there are advice
Not
and
taking those
service
forward for
only.
consultation.
yep,
It's advice and service only.
Oh, so it's more about the models themselves.
yeah, no, I get that.
Yeah. Sorry, yeah, it does it, so that there's those three alternatives
Yep,
that are available to us through the DIA's advice
yep,
to look at as, in more detail. What we're saying that we don't believe there's enough benefit in spending any more time and effort
doing on those aspects.
on those three. So the trust model was the one where you can't actually access LGFA's funding.
Yep.
So we don't believe that's
No,
viable.
yep.
The Kapiti Coast CCO or WCCO, whatever the acronym is, the individual, us as a CCO with no other council.
Yep.
Again, we don't believe that warrants taking any further because it's a whole lot of cost to set it up.
Got that, yep.
And for this, we're doing the same thing we're doing now,
Yeah,
but
we're
you'd
looking
add
at a
a
bit like a business unit approach.
yes, but you'd have a CEO, you'd have a CE, and you'd have a governance, you'd have managers, you'd have a governance board.
Yep,
So
yep.
again, we're saying we don't think that's viable. And
So
the
we're just
first one-
removing those from, that removes those.
yeah, from any further work. So the,
Okay,
the
that's cool.
advice one is again, you don't own the assets.
Yep.
It's the same as the Wellington Water model. Again, we don't see any reason why you'd want to do
No,
that.
no, that's cool. No, that's cool. Thank you for the clarity. I just wanted to get that right in my head.
Yeah, I had to read those paragraphs a couple of times. Yeah. So just to be clear, the recommendations that we're looking at today involves leaving any future discussions around water service with the Wellington region, noting that some other councils have already exited from that as well, and progressing an internal business unit, an option with Horowhenua and that wider option to the north. At this stage, to be narrowed down potentially further next year before we go out for consultation. Is that right?
Yes. So we are required to consult on a minimum of 2 options. So the paper talks about our preferred approach is to use the recent paper or changes to consultation that are provided to us, and that we consult on potentially we do more work on those 3 options. A minimum you have to do 2, so you have to consider the business unit and you have to consider one other. At the moment we're saying there's a bit more work to do on those alternatives and we need a bit more time, and we'd come back to you in the new year with advice as to how we proceed with those.
Is that clear for everybody?
Yep.
Yep. Shelley? Councillor Warwick.
Yeah, and which part of the wording does it allow us to just do our own thing? Because it's.
So that's at the
You're
end of G, alongside an internal
Oh,
business
okay.
unit option as
There you
per
go.
option
Yeah.
F. Okay. Councillor Halliday?
Nope, Councillor Coe just pointed it out to me. Thank you. I just wanted to see where the trust, the internal business unit, where we're resolving to continue on that, but it's on G.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's cool. Thank you.
Yeah, great. Okay, so Councillor Wilson has said he will move this. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Coe. Right of introduction, Councillor Wilson. We're moving, just to clarify, A through G, with
Yes.
some parts to B, on page 46 of
Yep.
Councillor G.
Yeah, I'll speak to it briefly. The paper is an incredibly well considered paper. We've been, we've had a number of workshops and briefings, etc. I'm really satisfied that the degree of skill and knowledge that we have in house will suit the purposes for the people of Kapiti as far as the water is concerned. Any other alternative is fraught with difficulty and impossibility actually, but it still gives us sufficient flexibility to have discussions with our neighbours to the north, and I don't see as mutually exclusive options that we wouldn't be able to share information and technology etc. with anybody if that works. So the paper is constructed perfectly, so happy to move it.
Councillor Coe?
Yeah, look, I just want to say that what we've discovered in all our briefings and workshops is that Kapiti is actually providing a highly efficient, effective service in this space. We are leading the Wellington region, in my view. We are looked up to, and to me, our job is to offer our community the most cost-effective, efficient service going forward into the future. And that certainly means not joining with Wellington, looking at opportunities to the north and comparing those. So I think what's proposed in this paper definitely does that. It's looking at what is the most cost-effective delivery mechanism going forward. Of course, things change over time, and I think the options that we are looking at don't preclude, further changes down the road. So I'm fully supportive of the direction that we're heading in. I think staff have done a fantastic job in analysing all the different options and guiding us on the way forward. So, yeah, I'm really happy to support this, the recommendations as set out in this paper. Thank you.
Right, well said. Councillor Halliday?
Yeah, through you, Madam Chair. Completely agree with the last two councillors' comments. I've been involved through both the reforms processes and consider myself pretty well informed in this space. And it's a pretty stark picture painted for what's happening down the Wellington Way. 62% of their water is not making it produced and paid for, it's not making it to the tap. The CEO just, I think it was this week, commented on the state of the water entity down there, and the fact that it's been underfunded, which really brings into question how the councils down there allowed that to happen, my perspective. It's all very well and fine to saying it was someone else's problem. It wasn't, it was their problem, and it should have been addressed in a more stronger fashion. The gap between the situation and our own is significant, and the cost for us is also a significant increase for what I can see as no real benefit other than the benefit of the Wellington market. So for now, certainly agree with the paper as written. I also wanted to say, in my opinion, this is still not a fix. This is not the fix that there's another infrastructure issues, the issues that we have. Government devolved infrastructure to councils to deliver and to use rates as its tool to do this. And that too, it's maxed out now, as I referred to at the local government. The answer to just increased lending and borrowing caps is not the answer, and there needs to be joint investment with funds coming out of the general taxation pool, in my opinion. The blame game from central government to local only comes from the fact that local government was set up to fail, in my opinion, and this does need to be corrected in this space. But I will be certainly supporting this paper and look forward to being an exemplar of how waters can be delivered. Thank you.
Councillor Kirby?
I just want to tautoko the previous comments and add there has been considerable pain over the 12 years since the decision was made to introduce water meters here in Kapiti. Initially, it was a very interesting debate that went on, very conflicted debate. But we're in a position now where we, as has been previously said, our water services are very good. And part of that was because of those previous decisions, and the debt that we now carry as a council is directly related to some of those decisions. But it is now 10, 12 years down the track, we are now reaping the benefits of hard decisions that were made back then. And I just want to acknowledge those decisions and the weight that our previous years of community have paid around rates and water charges that have enabled us to be in a position now where we're saying, actually, we're not going to face the sort of increases around water that some other areas of our region are going to face over the next period of time. And it's because of that previous one. And every conversation I have in my community about this, it's very clear that no one wants us to go with Wellington at the moment. So this decision is not just a pragmatic one, it's also a community supported one. So hence it's great to see this report. I look forward to the rest of the journey. Thanks to the staff for guiding us and giving us all the information we need as we've been walking through. Thank you.
I'll talk with that and put a name to it. Thank you, Jenny Rowan. Also, Pat Doherty was quite instrumental in driving that work, and Gail Ferguson. Pat Doherty, of course, now trying to sort out Wellington. So I'd just like to acknowledge the work that's gone on with creating the Wellington model. There's some really robust, thorough work going on in that space, analysing the problem they have, projecting some models of how that might be addressed over decades. And also some really careful work going on in terms of how any future entity would be constructed and recruited. So some learnings there, I think, for the rest of the country too, as they go through forming their water entities. So definitely useful being part of that process, and we definitely had to be part of that conversation. But now is the time for us to say bye for now and consider these other options. And we certainly wish them all well as they form an entity to address the issues that they have down there and provide solid and resilient water services for the Wellington region. Councillor Coфord?
Oh, thanks, Janet. Councillor Kathy and I were just reminiscing about the old days, Hutt County in the 70s, and we were on water bores, collecting water from the roof, flushing the bores to the loos to get water from the bores. And we enjoyed the Kapiti District Council being formed and amalgamating, of course, with Old Taki, Waikanai and Paikokariki. And we've enjoyed people like Dennis Ferrier in the old days getting the infrastructure in place and working out where all the pumping stations went. And it really was a fantastic piece of work, that infrastructure. We watched all the pipes go in and the wastewater being treated, and I think it's just state of the art, it's world class, and I just take my hat off to everybody for that. And okay, now we're 50 odd years down the road, and we've got depreciation. We've got to revisit that, and we've taken we've got to sort out the funding for the water because they've come from rates and things, other avenues, and so we've got to put it into a separate entity and address that, and I understand that's probably why the costs are going to be a little bit higher than what they are with the status quo. Thank you.
Oh, there's a book in this, isn't there? I'll go back to Nigel for a right of reply.
Yeah, thanks for that. Whilst I'm not often accused of being particularly mature myself, I think this shows the maturity of our council. And I'll go with what you said, Janet, as far as Jenny Rowan was concerned, who showed a lot of courage at the time, and we had a different view on water meters. But what it did do is it put a focus on water. It was a huge discussion. And the other thing that people forget about, which I'd like to remind you, we had about 4 years of serious droughts. So we can't get too above ourselves. We haven't had a drought for quite a long time, but 4 years of droughts in a row, well, that'll focus you on water. So I'm sure the Sean Mellon Dam is already part of the future considerations, but I think what this does is it gives us the freedom to determine our own path as far as water is in the future. So congratulations to Sean and all of the team who've been involved in this. Well done.
Very good. So I'll put this to the vote. All in favour, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
That's carried. Thank you. Onwards and upwards. A lot of water to go under the bridge yet. Okay, we're moving on to 11.3, Economic Development Operating Model, finalising the establishment of the trust. Thanks for your accommodation of jiggling this council agenda. We have people who've been waiting for this all morning, so. And people who are online on hold, I hope you are able to keep yourselves busy in the interim. Sorry for the delay. So this is on page 33 of our council agendas. And welcome Darren and Mark, Neil and Scott. Thanks for coming along. And Chris is online.
Kia ora.
I believe Chris is going to open up for us. Thanks, Chris.
Thank you. Kia ora. Today we are taking our second step and our process to stand up the new economic development operating model. You'll recall in August that Council approved in principle to stand up the new operating model. And today we are looking at the first suite of documentation that is necessary to put in place, again in principle, to get the ball rolling. So there's two parts to the paper that you've received today. One is around the new trust that we're looking to stand up. We have a trust deed and relationship a framework agreement for your consideration. We're looking for in principle agreement to those. And then secondly, for the new limited liability company that will sit underneath that trust, we are looking to get approval in principle to the limited liability company's constitution and a relationship framework agreements between the company and council. As with the Affordable Housing Trust, we will be looking to appoint trustees and go through a process of establishing those settings once the decisions are ideally made today. So there's going to be further conversation. You'll see there's delegation to the Mayor and Chief Executive in the paper to take forward these documents, assuming that once trustees are in place, there aren't any legally significant amendments proposed by the trustees. So one small step forward. There is a lot of paperwork, which I know will have been a lot to work through. I just want to assure everyone it's quite standard. There aren't any special fish hooks in there, and we have had legal advice from our legal team on those documents. We have worked through these with elected members, and I hope the paper includes answers to previous questions that have been raised. However, we're happy to take questions, and I just will note we have Neil Mackay, the chair of the EDKB, and Scott Houston from the EDKB, and actually Kim as well, who will be able to answer questions along with Darren Grant and Mark. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anybody else have anything to add? Neil, Scott, Darren, Mark? Neil, would you like to add anything? Yeah, just wait for your microphone to go red. There it is.
Right. Look, I just want to acknowledge the good paper that's before you. It's very comprehensive, but so too is the process. The process that we've gone through over the last, I don't know, 3 or 4, 5 months has been very, very useful in workshopping with councillors and going through and understanding, what this operating model looks like and feels like. And I believe there's a body of knowledge around the group and councillors that is well, and up to date and up to speed, if you like, in terms of the activities in and around the operating model. I guess today is really about bringing that to some sort of head and looking to actually implement the model, and that's what we're looking to obviously achieve. There's a lot of things hanging off the end of this, and that is there's a number of projects ready for operationalising, and there's the regional infrastructure fund activities that are all looking to be implemented on the other side of this. So just looking forward to hearing your questions, but also to moving forward if we can, and getting into the new year with implementation in mind.
Great. Scott, do you have anything you want to add? No? Liz?
Thank you.
Councillor
Look,
Coe.
I have some questions around the appointment and tenure of the directors of the company. So I don't see anything in there about rotation of directors within the company. And I think that's something that we need to consider. We've got it in place for the trustees, and I would have thought it would be quite appropriate to have a rotation policy for the company as well. So I would see, we could perhaps cut and paste what we've got under the trustee section into the company section. The other question I have, because having been involved with this from year dot. The intention always was that this would be facing out to the business community as opposed to council. So this is an organisation that's working for business, it's run by business people, and I'm wondering if there's room in the appointment of directors to the company for, at the discretion of the trustees, whether they may include key stakeholders in the process of recruitment of directors of the company. So it's not making it mandatory, but I think it would be a really good gesture to invite perhaps representatives from the Chamber, from the Murray Business Network, etc., to somehow participate, be involved in some way, not necessarily have the final vote, but to include them in setting out the requirements for the directors, the job description, and maybe getting some input before any appointments are finalised. Because I have a concern that this could be a very tightly held organisation, potentially the way it's structured now, whereby the business community is kind of held to ransom by a group of people that are there in situ. So just wondering whether we can perhaps, how do we allow for that? And also I note that there's some conflicting information under 8.4 of the paper. We have, let me just get my, it talks about the appointment of a permanent chair, which I think is an incorrect word. It's not a permanent chair. And that it would be after 2 years, and yet in the Constitution we're talking about after 18 months the chair would be appointed. So I think there's a bit of rewording of that required. So to me it would make sense after 18 months to appoint a new chair, and then a few months after that, say 6 months after that, the chair and the trust appoint the remaining directors. So I think some tidying up of the wording may be required to fix up that anomaly.
Agree that normally in practice that you should have a 3-year term. Generally, the term is for directors is stipulated, and there's either rotation or there's reappointments. In terms of the key stakeholder involvement, I agree with that as well. In terms of their involvement and making sure that we're not insular, that in fact we are sort of reaching out to the rest of the key stakeholders within the community and getting their involvement. I totally agree with that. And I agree with you in terms of permanent chair. In fact, in the document, my understanding is that that the board will choose the chair, and that will be an annual activity. So, but you're right. It's a bit at odds in terms of the conflicts around the papers. So I agree with all the points you've made.
I think they've been noted, and they can be corrected and approved. Councillor Halliday?
Yeah, just some points, and certainly support Councillor Coe's views. Just a couple of little points of clarity more from my end. I just want to know, with regards to the whole situation, who puts together the economic development refresh? Is that sort of still an internal document with council, or will that sit with the new entity? Sorry, Jen, I didn't mean to be staring at you.
Darren? Oh, Neil?
Look, in terms of the current economic development refresh, Council's been working with the EDKB in terms of the sign-off of the refresh that will be coming to Council, or coming to the Strategy Ops and Finance Committee next week. Mm-hmm. There will be a process in terms of further engagement and discussion with stakeholders before a final sign-off of that strategy in March next year, sort of thing.
And what will happen with regards to the next one?
So in terms of going forward, there is a role for EDKB in terms of with a new structure, in terms of the implementation and the ongoing sort of the direction of that, and working with council in terms of the future refreshes of the strategy.
Okay. In the trustees and some of the other things here, when we've talked to this previously, there's a list of skill sets are required to be either a director or a trustee. And we talked at the time that it was fairly descriptive with regards to, it seemed like you needed to have all those skills. And I didn't see that had changed. We talked towards being that we expect people to have a mix of those skills, but not necessarily able to tick off every single one as such. And I didn't see that really articulated in the paper. Maybe that could be just, I'm sure it's just a slight word change, with regards to that would be appreciated. If I'm incorrect in that, that's fine, but that's just sort of how I read that.
I definitely agree. It was a similar feedback that we had in terms of the housing trust also.
Yeah,
And some
maybe it was the
adjustments-
Housing Trust.
Yeah, some adjustments were made to that, and agree, not everyone can have all skill sets. That needs to be the board as a
Yeah.
whole.
Then just change the wording to sort of allow for that would be appreciated.
Yeah.
Just wanted to talk to the annual letter of expectation. I'm picking this as a touchstone document between the entity and council, and I don't have an issue with that. But I thought the time frame was actually quite tight, 1 year, year on year sort of scenario. I was wondering, was that just being done as part of the appeasing, shall we say, appeasing the process? Because there seems to be lots of checks and balances in here. And I'm just wondering whether an annual, that updating that, talking to that annual letter of expectations needs to be an annual thing, or whether it potentially could just be part of the process of the new council comes in, and you have that letter of expectation at the beginning of the term, so to speak.
Good point. Good point, yeah.
Yep, just a thought there. Now, this is being sort of funded, the EDKB, the Economic Development Strategy is funded through the business rate. I just want to get an idea, how does that flow through to the new entity as such?
This is the target business rate.
Yes.
So I understand that this has been part of the annual plan
Yes.
discussions, and basically that funding would be allocated in terms of the trust, which
Yep.
would then buy services and work with council in terms of the provision of services, and that would be part of the relationship framework and also the letter of expectation in terms of what's delivered from that targeted rate.
Cool. Okay. No, I'm happy with that. Also, just a little thing on page 37, 13.2.1 proposes the initial name for the trust as Kapiti New Zealand Trust. I note that there's no Macron over Kapiti. Was that intentional?
I think very much like the housing trust, it's a holding name. The trust would need to have some own input into that process,
Yep.
and so it's a holding name only.
I
at
have
this
no
stage.
issue. Sorry,
Yeah.
I have no issue with the name.
Yep.
It was just that we've had a document come recently from Mana Whenua where Macron wasn't used, which has thrown up a little bit of a can of worms with regards to some discussion. I just noticed it was the same here, and I was just wondering whether that was just a type thing.
That's probably
And the
an
trustee does have it.
oversight.
Okay, that's right. No,
In
just
terms
checking.
of just consistency, in terms of some of the usage of macrons through the
Yep.
documents.
Yeah, I appreciate it's more something we're going to have a chat about moving forward. But yeah, just wanted to see whether it was something that was pattern forming as such. That's it for me. Yep, thank you.
Cool, thank you. So just for clarity, we're in question time, is that right, at the moment? Yeah, cool. So, yeah, look, I've been really clear from the start that I'm sort of quite supportive of this structure in principle. I've raised some issues and concerns and questions in writing, so they're a matter of record. I don't need to go into them today. But just reading through the document, I did have a couple of questions. I'll ask through the chair because I'm not sure who to point them to otherwise. But on page 35 of the agenda, diagram 2 there outlines a sort of sliding scale of council's funding for what is essentially a private corporation. Annual budget 25 and 26 is 90% of the funding. So what is the 100% of the funding to start at? What's the starting figure?
Off the top of my head, I wouldn't have that information. Roughly, in terms of budget, $2 million, so I think.
More or less?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. That's useful to know, thank you. I still do have some ongoing concerns about accountability through all of this, because once it's set up. It's very difficult to claw back any power. So agenda at 8.5 talks about clear delivery expectations. So in the very unlikely event that this entity doesn't meet the very clear delivery expectations, what power does council have to hold it accountable for that?
So initially, if it's a limited liability company that's not meeting its targets, the shareholder is got to hold the limited liability company to account. But there's also the relationship between the trust and the and council, and so council in that discussion there would be the reasons why that's not achieving what it's achieving, and there would be some discussion between those two parties as to what needs to be done to actually get it back on track or look at other options. So that's fundamentally the relationships and the decision making.
And definitely in terms of the documents, what we've tried to do is make sure there's a clear process in terms of in terms of the relationship framework agreement, and that's with the trust and the limited liability company. And there's also the letter of expectation, which sets expectations as well, sort of thing. So trying to make sure there's a structured process in terms of reporting, and also the ability to take steps if those haven't been met.
Okay, thank you for the explanation, but I am not actually satisfied because it starts.
Sorry, save that for debate. Thank you.
It is a question. I do have a question.
You just made a statement.
All right.
Just stick to questions, please.
I will, despite Councillor Coe having made a number of statements, not questions, I will stick to questions. What I'm after is, how will it actually be enforced, rather than two parties who, we will agree on stuff. When one party chooses not to uphold the expectations, I understand that there's mechanism to have a nice conversation about that, but how will council actually have enforceable rights in that setup? Where are they, I suppose, is my question. Where's the clause in the agreement that actually outlines that power?
Well, I guess there's a couple.
Hang on a minute. Just wait for your microphone, please, Neil.
Can you hear me now? Yeah.
Yeah.
So haven't sort of delved deeply into this, but certainly, the power. Fundamentally, council is a funder of, albeit that it's at least less and less as time goes on, a funder of that facility, of that entity, and as such has the power, I would imagine, if it's absolutely serious and a council is not been getting any responsiveness from the trust to actually withhold those funds. So I imagine that's one aspect where it's a lever that could be pulled to address non-performance.
Just backing up Neil, obviously council is providing funding to these entities. If they are not performing, there is a process in terms of how that would be worked through, and ultimately it can take further steps from there in terms of non-performance, in terms of obligations to council.
I'll leave it there and leave it for councillors to decide.
Feel free to contribute to debate as well. Councillor Kirby.
Just a question of clarity for me. I read in the trust deed 7.1 talks about, in addition to mandatory and default duties, the first one, A, is develop and maintain a working relationship with the settler and with organisations and business in the Kapiti Coast District. I can't see any clause in relation to the directors of the limited liability company that puts that duty specified in there as well. Particularly the second part of that, I think the working relationship with the settlor for the limited liability company will be covered under the relationship agreement, but the requirement to develop and maintain relationship with other organisations and businesses in the Kapiti Coast District, I haven't found that specified in the responsibilities for the directors of the company. Am I right in that question, that it's not specified? All right, I'm probably making a statement, and I probably should make this in debate. I think that's a really important requirement in there that needs to be actually in the documentation, not in a letter of expectation or even in a relationship agreement, but actually in the Constitution. Because the whole point of this is to support our business organisations and our business ecosystem, not just build a fantastic company.
So I am taking
Yeah.
at the moment suggestions for other things that we think should be included. General opinions and perspectives I'm not taking, but so what do you think actually should be included?
I think a clause similar to what we've got here in the trust deed needs to be included in the constitution of the
So-
limited liability company, specifying that the directors need to develop and maintain a working relationship with organisations and businesses in the Kapiti Coast District. Something along those lines.
Got that? Have we got that?
Yep,
Yep.
no, got you. And thank you for bringing that to our attention. Yep.
Councillor Warwick?
My question is around the 90% down to 30% of the targeted business rate. So by 2029, are we still going to keep the same targeted business rate, but that 70% will come back to council for economic development, or does the targeted business rate go down over time? Because we've now got a company.
Sorry, your worship. May I comment on that?
Of course.
Thank you. I don't have a button to put my hand up for some reason, so I thought I might just add. Essentially, we're proposing that through the transition phase of standing up these new arrangements, that we will continue to collect the business rate as it stands, that we would be effectively annually negotiating what would be delivered with that funding. The dividend that comes back to council will effectively be offset in subsequent years for business, and if we get a larger share than the business rate itself, it would go towards general ratepayers essentially. The reason we're proposing to continue to collect the business rate is that council and the community are effectively investing in something, in this case, the economic development strategy and its implementation. We can control the activity that we contribute funding towards. We won't have the same say in what goes forward, or won't be quite the same relationship if we're not funding activity that we'd like to see progressed. So the questions around accountability and having, for want of better words, a say in what is happening in this space, I think funding is a really important lever for that, and as part of the structure that's been put in place to make sure that we have that opportunity going forward.
Thank you. Does that answer your question, Councillor Warwick? So I think it's yes, we are still intending to collect the same business rate and offset that against other economic development activity. Would that sum it up, Chris? Is that what you?
Yes.
In a tiny nutshell. Glenn?
Yeah, thanks. Building on what's been talked about on funding, a little bit on BEAD as well, but is there anything in here, and I'm going to ask two sides of the same coin actually, so it's both ways. Is there anything that, let's say next term there's a new council and that council then decides, even though the board is, or the group is meeting all its performance and doing great, is there anything that stops the new council from saying, actually, we don't want this, we're going to stop funding? And what would happen is there? And on the other side of the sword is, if it's not performing, is there anything then which would allow the council to say, actually, you're not performing at all, we're going to stop funding, as a way to, do it?
Well, there's a council question, there's a trust, sorry, there's a liability question. So from our point of view, from the limited liability company's point of view and the trust, if the trustees are responsible, the shareholders are responsible for the performance of the business. If that's not performing, then they've got to look at options that they can look that they could just change the directors. They could limit the amount of funds that are going to be needed. They've got to understand exactly what it is that's causing not to perform. From the council's point of view, I can't speak on their behalf.
Chris, did you want to address that?
Yeah, I did. I think the steps that we've put in place around an annual letter of expectation and the reporting back on the progress against those expectations means that we have regular and open conversations about how things are going. So if the trust and the company are not delivering to their purpose, which has been set out in the documents you're being asked to agree today, then we would be looking to have a discussion around that and for action to be taken for them to get back in line with those settings. So I think there are checks and balances built into these arrangements. They're very similar to what we have for the Affordable Housing Trust. And the reason I'm mentioning that is because the people who were interested in being part of the Affordable Housing Trust as trustees are extremely high calibre people who want to do and I guess things that benefit this community. With that in mind, we have an expectation that we will get a range of high calibre people who would be interested in serving on the trust and in the limited liability company. So I might frame it that way. And there is dispute resolution built into the documents and mediation if it was to come to that. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so that answers one side of it. The other side, I guess, was the protection of the trust of the fund. So is there any way of protecting, in the long-term plans and annual plans going forward, that they will get the money if they are performing, or could sequential councils just pull the plug, I guess? And is there any protection against that from happening, or any way to protect it?
Yeah, I think that's a good question.
Look, in terms of funding, obviously council has the ability to make decisions in terms of funding requirements. I suppose part of the idea of this model, though, is that there's also external funding and increased amount of external funding to support the trust and the company to continue its activities. And so again, this would come down to the funding split and those sorts of things, and over time, the ability for the trust to have more financial independence to ensure that it can continue without sole reliance on council funding.
I would also add that would probably need to go through a long-term plan process.
Yeah.
Which would involve feedback and submissions and decision-making. And the same would apply to the previous question, actually, around the targeted business rate. There was to be a change around that.
Can I also just deal with the non-performance issue a little bit more as well? So as the limited liability company is getting into its work, every transaction is a major transaction until such time as there's an asset base that's been built from the limited liability company. So the trust is very much involved in the decision making of the limited liability company as it gets into its work, as it starts to grow and perform. So I think that needs to be, it's a check and balance that's in place that's it's there for that purpose.
Bede?
Gee, sorry, just one more question, if you'll indulge me. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Sure.
Shelley asked a question and it prompted me something I was meant to ask. So going back to page 35 in that diagram too, where it's got the declining percentages of income that council would put into funding this. Obviously those are projections, presumably, and I'm making assumptions here, presumably based on how well people think this vehicle will perform, what are the projections? What's it based on? Or are they just made up numbers?
I'm happy to take that question if you'd like.
Darren's just turned on his microphone, so I'll go to him first, if that's okay, Chris?
Yeah.
Always a chip in. Oh, he's happy for you to do it. Okay, shoot, Chris.
Oh, okay. I was going to say, Bede, I think you might look at those as more as targets than they are assumptions based. So with the shift into the new model, part of the requirement for these settings is that the new entities are going out and looking for funding to support economic development initiatives and to lift effectively the economy and ability for business to thrive in Kapiti. So we will be focused on effectively what is a 15% or close to adjustment year on year as that transition period pushes through. So we're looking back to accountability. We would be looking to hold the new operating model to account for achieving that. So they'll be out and about looking at what can we do so that we can bring that back to the community.
And I suppose in terms of providing some comfort, we're aware in terms of the external funding that we get currently. We're also aware of opportunities where we can get further funding with the board, with a new structure, can get further funding. And I think if you talk to the EDKB, if they're going to deliver on the projects that they want to deliver on, they're going to have to increase the funding quite substantially in terms of other sources of funding. So even if the council funding stayed the same, the actual amount of funding required going forward for the business model or the delivery of projects is quite substantial and would need more and more external funding to support that. And, those are some chunky numbers.
Yeah, useful to clarify, thank you. It just doesn't make that clear in the paper, but thank you.
Okay, I'm not seeing any more questions, so I'll look for a mover for A through H on page 33 of council agendas. Moved by Councillor Coe.
Yeah, I'll move.
Seconded by Councillor Halliday. Right of introduction.
Thank you. Look, this has been a long journey to this point. The Chamber and KEDA in their respective roles have pushed long and hard for this outcome, for a situation where economic development decisions are made by the business community for the business community, and to achieve some level of independence from council, to remove it from some of the bureaucratic procedures that council gets tied up in, so that they can be more flexible and responsive to decisions that need to be made in the economic development space. We are looking, in terms of accountability, I think the key thing here is for there to be accountability to the business community rather than council. And we are seeing the intention to create other sources of funding. And I think, council can't have its cake and eat it too. It can't be in a situation where it's providing a minority of the funding but still wanting to have 100% of the control. So, the intention is that decisions are made in this space by people who have the right skills and experience to do so. And I think that's what's been lacking in the past. In the past, we have seen decisions made around this table, or lack of decisions actually, by people who really do not have the relevant business knowledge, experience, acumen, credibility. And that was the whole intention by this move way back when, to put it into a situation where you do have access to the right skills to make decisions. I'm really excited about the potential for the trust and for the company to make a big difference to economic development in Kapiti. I still believe that there are benefits beyond just to the business community. There are community benefits in this, as specified in the trust deed. You know, there are benefits in terms of education and job opportunities for our wider community. And I've always felt that it should not just be funded purely by targeted business rate because, you know, for that very reason. So I'm you know, really happy to support the move forward in this direction. I do hope that the amendments that we've discussed today will be taken into account in terms of any final documentation. So I'm not just wondering whether we need to note that those will be taken into account, or give the Chief Executive approval to make amendments.
Yeah, so under
as per
H, we've got
discussed,
the
so-
authority for
Yeah.
the Mayor and Chief Executive, and we have taken a note of those.
Yeah, so
happy,
just
happy to recirculate them so that we can make sure you're happy with them, and to others as well.
yeah. Yeah, so long as there is
Yep.
that discretion there,
Yep.
and that I just wanted to make that up front, you know, that those points will be taken into account. Yeah, so I'm really keen to see this progress forward, and to I think it's a whole new era for economic development in Kapiti if you're going down this track, and it's really exciting. So yeah, I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Yeah, very positive. I think I got Kim Tahiwi next.
Kia ora. I'm assuming we're in debate.
Yes,
Okay, great.
we have moved and seconded. And we're in
So,
debate.
yeah, so it has been a long time coming, but I just want to acknowledge, because obviously we all know there has been a perception that there are groups out there and you know, that are already doing this mahi. So for me, it's not about creating another group to do everything. It's about creating something that can bring those groups together and have a strategic lens over the whole of Kapiti. Because too often, and we've seen it before, that we don't have honest and open collaboration with all key groups, because every group in this space has value. Every group in this space touches a part of the community that we may not. So there's value in that collaboration. And so that's a real, for me, that's a real high priority. Collaboration, not only in this space, but in all the spaces that council's in. And so the key to this is, I personally don't like it when we try to make rules to control people to have a relationship. I don't think that works. I think we need to really commit and understand the value of developing those relationships. And that's what we're committed to doing. That's what we've always talked about. But we need the vehicle to be able to do that. So a forced relationship never ends well. And that's what I mean. We need to be really open and honest. We don't have to like each other, but we do have to think about the wider objective that we're all trying to do. And I think this is what that does. That's all.
Councillor Halliday.
Through you, Madam Chair, look, certainly support the comments of the last two speakers. Been a long journey to get to this point. I acknowledge concerns around accountability and associated issues that could bring up, especially around egos and fiefdoms, which have been a real issue in the past. But I rely on the Economic Development Strategy, Letter of Expectation, relationships and other frameworks to address this as we move forward. In this process, there's an element of letting go, and with regards to this independent pathway, and that can be uncomfortable because we're not necessarily used to that. We're used to making those decisions and making those calls ourselves. But it's been a significant aspect of this journey from my perspective, based on Council's past performance in this space. That stems from my time with a small business down at Paraparaumu Beach when I was on the Business Association. My journey with KITA, with fellow councillor Liz Coe, who actually I want to acknowledge you, Liz, and that sort of thing. You've been in this space for a long, long time, and you have been tenacious and you have been positive, and it's taken you to get to this table to make sure that it's being pulled through. Now, it's one of my motivations in being elected last triennium was this, and that independence aspect's always been a key. And I'm hoping like heck we've got this one right. But I'm confident. I'm confident of everything that's been put in place. So this has my full support, and I look forward to the journey. Will we get it 100% correct? No, I don't think we will. Okay, but that's the point. That's the point of getting the right people around the table, and we are very fortunate, as has been pointed out, in this community that we have very, very well qualified people that are prepared to put their hands up. And I salute you, gentlemen, for being part of that process over the last few years, because I know you've taken it in the neck a little bit as well. But we're getting there, and I think we're getting there in a positive way. You know, some of us have got to stick around to try and make sure that that does keep flowing through. I'm sure we will. That's our part of our commitment in the space as such. But I'm looking forward to the journey. Wish I could be a part of it, but that's that hands-off approach that the pathway I've had to go down with regards to that, and I have to approach this in a different way. It will certainly have my support, and I look forward to seeing where we go.
Pete, Mr. Larison.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So again, yeah, I've been really supportive of this structure from the start. Business person in Kapiti for some years myself, on the boards of Kita and Chamber for a few years. Have been involved in a lot of conversations. Just like to thank staff for all the work that's gone into this over time. It's been a lot of effort, and I appreciate that it hasn't always been easy at times. Some of us are harder to deal with than others, and so that brings challenges, I'm sure. Having said that, I don't want anyone to take what I say next personally, because it isn't intended personally, okay? I wanted to make sure that I could stand back and just look at this as objectively as I possibly could, and say to myself, well, does this stack up? How you frame something often makes a difference. And I thought, as I was thinking through, reading through these documentations, I thought, well, what have we got here? We've got a tax take, a targeted rate for businesses, funding into council, so public money. We've got public money funding what is essentially a private corporation made up by a trust, a limited liability company will set up all sorts of other company structures. And I think any time you've got public money going into a private enterprise, there should be questions, tough questions, about is this appropriate use of public money, and is there appropriate safeguards? And I've heard talk of checks and balances, and I'm not convinced that checks and balances are in place. I think we have nice agreements about things where people will hopefully talk nicely to each other. I may be cynical, but that's not how people end up talking. Having worked in dispute resolution for 18 years, my experience tells me now is the time to put those things in place, because once it's set up, your opportunity to put things in place is gone. So if we don't make sure that this is sound at the start, then we're exposing ourselves to all manner of evils down the track. So that's why I've been pushing for things now, because now is the time to do it. If we do it well, then this thing could have enormous benefit for our community, absolutely. If it's not done well, what are the risks? Actually unknown. That's why we need to do it well. And for me, getting on with it isn't a good enough reason to ignore the risks. I take on, thank you for those comments, Councillor Coe. You'll have your chance to respond. I take on board Councillor Kirby's comment about putting things in the Constitution, and that's useful. Bear in mind, of course, once this is established, the limited liability can change its own constitution by its own power. So how you set it up is not necessarily how it remains. Letters of expectation, they're useful. They're useful, right? But there is no enforceable rights. There's nowhere you can say, well, if you breach our expectations, this is our recourse. in terms of accountability, Councillor Coe's right, it should be looking at what's the accountability within the business world. Now, say I'm a business person and I'm working in an area where this new structure decides to start to work, and let's say that this new structure's work impacts my business quite considerably. A business that I've maybe borrowed on my mortgage to fund, I've spent my life pouring into, and this new structure is now taking on business activity that's stripping the business away from me. What's my recourse? Because actually in the structure I don't see anything. Okay? At the moment, if economic development does something stupid, I can come to the council table and I can petition to councillors to petition on my behalf. It's not perfect, let's face it, we all know that, but it's something. What is the recourse? Where is my right here in this new structure? It's non-existent. Okay, there's nothing in there unless I'm missing something. That's what we need to make sure. We need to make sure that we're not creating a beast that just goes on its merry way and destroys things in its path. And funding, yeah, sure, funding is a measure of power, but once the funding stops and it's self-funding, that's it. So I'm not going to go so far as to say I wouldn't vote for this as I was on council, because I'm not sure that the alternative is a great option. What I want to put to council is that we need to do more work to make this better, because at the moment, in my view, it's not fit for purpose, but it could be. That's all. Thank you, and good luck with however this goes.
Councillor Kirby?
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to just start by saying thanks to the EDKB, because they've also been on this journey along with staff and put a lot of time and effort, particularly Neil, in getting around. I know you've sat down and explained your way through it with me a few times, so thank you for that. Noting the previous comments, I want to ask a question, if that's all right,
Yeah,
Madam
can ask
Mayor.
a question anytime.
I can't find anywhere, and I don't remember in my previous reading, I was just having a quick browse through it now, whether there is anywhere in the documentations, particularly in the relationship framework agreements, on a process for conflict resolution that's documented and caught in the documentation anywhere? Because I can't find it. Is there anything?
I would need to go back and check the documents. There's definitely things that we've discussed before, sort of things I'll need to go back and check and come back.
Because I think that's probably a step beyond just duties, is somewhere we need to have a process that can lead to conflict resolution, and what that process will be clearly outlined would be my recommendation. That's pretty standard practice in most contract agreements, and that may address some of the issues that that Bede's talking about, Mr. Laracy's talking about. I don't know, but that's just just a question.
And a kind of suggestion attached to it.
Yeah, there's probably a suggestion to explore that a little bit further. The other question I would have is some of the recommendations that we put through in questions, or things that needed to change. I'm not sure that the recommendation, I think it's H in our agenda, which is giving the Mayor and CE for non-legal. I would question whether some of those recommendations have legal implications, in which case that will have to come back to us.
Or we remove the word non-legal. If you're comfortable with us making those changes. The alternative is that we do bring it back to a further report.
I think there'd probably need to be some advice from legal around some of those changes, whether they will adjust, and I would be uncomfortable with leaving the responsibility to the Mayor and the CE to approve changes that do have legal ramifications.
So we'll leave it as it is, that we can make non-legal changes, and if any of those changes require a further report, then we'll do that.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
After we've got some advice around it. Nigel.
Thank you. I was listening to all of this online, which is fascinating. For me, a couple of questions, one of which is, these are rhetorical. you know,
So we're in debate. You
yeah.
can actually just say something that you
Yeah.
think if you want to.
Yeah, that's why I said these are rhetorical. But so, what's the problem we're trying to solve here? When it came to setting up the housing trust, we had a problem we were trying to solve, and that was that this new entity would have access to funds that we wouldn't have access to, and yada yada. That's great. In this situation, one of two things happens. You set up an entity like this, and because they're going to get access to loads of money, that's terrific. So why would we continue to put over, say, the next 3 years about $6 million into it? And then, and for the life of me, I've been trying to find examples of a model like this that works, and I can't find any. Then that comes down to what you think works means. You can make anything work if you throw enough money at it. But what this is in essence, is the transfer of public money into private hands on the basis of what we heard earlier this morning, to people who know better than us. Now, they may know better than me, but collectively what we do is we bring the voice of our communities, our various communities, to the table. That's who we represent. So I have to say my faith actually is in with Mark and Darren and our ED team, who are directly accountable. The problem I have with this is if we as a council are going to require accountability, that by definition means you're going to constrain in some way the entity. So then that might be an issue. And then if you don't want to constrain the entity, then you either get no or much less accountability. Ultimately, the bit that we are accountable for is the public provision of money. I haven't done the numbers, but I think overall, if you follow that pattern through to its conclusion to 2029, I think that adds up to about $8 million, might be a bit more, but say $8 million. So if we're going to spend $8 million of the public's money, I want to know that they're getting $8 million worth of value. And so how do you get that? And I got this fabulous quote from AI, it only takes a minute, that if you put in this model into AI and ask it what it thinks, AI is not a good diagnoser, but it's a fantastic prognosis deliverer. So I'll give you this, only a couple of sentences. It says, the situation you are describing is often referred to as crony capitalism. In crony capitalism, public funds are funneled into private enterprises, often with little oversight or accountability, and those in charge of the setup benefit personally. This can lead to a lack of transparency and fairness, as well as potential misuse of public resources for private gain. And so AI is not 100%, but I think they're on the money there. And so for me personally, I would keep this in-house, just as we made a decision earlier this morning about water. Why would we keep it in-house? Because we can control it. We have the people here, we have the resources. We're not outsourcing it to people who, we're not saying we don't trust them. We weren't saying that out loud. We were saying that we think we can deliver better here. So that's my tuppence worth.
Any further debate? Well, I'll chip in to say that we have been moving towards creating entities which are able to access external funding. We heard from Local Government New Zealand earlier in this meeting about how we cannot keep funding all our activities through rates. And organisations such as the ones we're setting up through the Housing Trust and this are the kind of things we can do to enable the community to look after the community. We have a relationship framework. We have a further opportunity to discuss checks and balances and reporting as outlined in paragraph 6 and 8 of council agendas. I say let's progress. A lot of work has gone into this. It's not unique. A lot of councils do similar things to this and is extremely successful, Tauranga being a case in point. So I encourage councillors to support this so that we can up our game. We've got some very skilled people who've helped us put this together and who are willing to continue to be involved as we transition to the new entity. They've proven their worth as part of the Kotahitanga Independent Board, which we don't look over their shoulder and check everything they're doing, and they haven't run roughshod over our business community yet. And they're not likely to anytime soon under a new structure. So let's all just relax a bit, go through with this, and we'll be able to help our businesses without having a long-term impact on rates and rates to the very businesses we're trying to help. And with that, I'll go to Councillor Coe for a right of reply.
Thank you, Mayor Janet. Just in response to some issues that have been raised, what is the problem we're trying to solve? I can tell you that quite specifically. So from day one, the problem we were trying to solve was the lack of attention given to economic development by council. When this journey started, there was a half a person dedicated to economic development. So that's one aspect. The second is the amount of frustration within the business community about the lack of attention to economic development and the lack of relationship with the business community, and thirdly, the lack of funding available for economic development. So those are the problems we are trying to solve. We are trying to attract more funding into economic development and strengthen the relationship between council and the business community, which has been a highly frustrating one for decades. It's certainly got a lot better since we've had the more resource in the ED department and the establishment of the EDKB, and there's room to enhance that even further. So that's the problem we're trying to solve, and getting around the bureaucratic processes of council, recognising that when you're operating in the business world, you need to be flexible, be able to react quickly without political interference. And we've, as I said earlier, we've had a track record of people around this table making decisions and are not equipped to do so. We've seen evidence of that in the last wee while of I won't go down that track any further, but we do need to put decisions that are relevant to the business community in the hands of people that have the relevant track record, skills and experience to be making decisions on those matters. In terms of risk, yes, there's always risk in what you do. And I think in this instance, it comes down to the people that we appoint to those roles. It's going to be absolutely vital that we have the right trustees in place to oversee, that we have the right directors around the table, that there's accountability in place. You know, you cannot prescribe everything in black and white that needs to be covered off. There's an element of trust in this and an element of picking the right people to do the job. And I think if we believe we've got the right people in place, then we have to entrust them to make the right decisions. You know, you can't cover everything to the nth degree. There's always that element of risk. I guess in terms of, Councillor Wilson's AI-generated comment about, private gain. In this instance, if there's any gain to be made from the activities of the company, it goes back to the trust. It doesn't go into private hands. So maybe you didn't instruct your AI model quite correctly when you were searching for an answer. This is all for community benefit. There is no individual who is going to enjoy private gain from the undertakings directly. It will be indirect for sure, because hopefully we will be promoting an environment here where businesses succeed. So in that sense, the private gain will be in the business community, not through, in the terms of the directors and the trustees of these organisations. So there's no conflict of interest here. Any gain should go out to the community, and that's where it's appropriate to be. Yeah, if there is a profit, that will go straight back into the trust, and therefore to help reduce our rates burden over time, and to enable the trust to engage in its charitable activities as set out in its trust deed. So to me, this is it's really vital that we progress these recommendations to achieve all the benefits that have been set out in the documentation. So yeah, I commend my fellow councillors to support this initiative. There's options in there to revisit how it's working down the track. To me, there is sufficient checks and balances in place without over-prescribing that. And we do need to give some leeway to the trustees and directors to do what they feel is appropriate to be done. So, you know, let's put our trust in them. Thank you.
Oh, okay. So I'll put that to the vote. All in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Against?
No.
Okay, division. All in favour, please raise your hands.
Thank you, Mayor Holbrow, Deputy Mayor Kirby, Councillor Halliday, Councillor Coe, Councillor Warwick, Councillor Spires,
Councillor Hanford online.
and online Councillor Hanford. It's
No, Sophie's got her hand up.
just in front of us here. Councillor Hanford, are you able to confirm that you are in favour of? Thank you.
She just put her thumb up.
That's carried.
Is Jocelyn there? Jocelyn's in favour too.
Thank you. Thank you,
She
Councillor
has
Pavanov.
used the correct icon.
And against, it is carried. We've got Councillors Wilson, Cooper and Coфord.
That's carried. Thank you very much. We are going to take a very short lunch break because we've been going quite a while. 15 minutes like you did yesterday, and when you were with Lawrence you did 15 minutes. Just because I'm back doesn't mean you can take half an hour.